Imagine this. A city that will one day rule the world does not begin with gold or marble or even armies. It begins with nothing more than a patch of wild land, wolves in the hills, and a handful of wandering shepherds. No one could have guessed that from this forgotten corner of Italy, the greatest empire the world had ever seen would rise. Rome, eternal, unstoppable, unforgettable, was born not in majesty, but in hunger, struggle, and myth. And it is here, on the banks of the Tiber River, that our story begins. The landscape of early Rome was not the bustling city we picture today. It was raw, untamed, and alive with danger. Dense forests spread across the hills, filled with wild boars and bears. The air was heavy with the smoke of campfires, the smell of wet soil after rain, and the sound of sheep bleating in the valleys. Life was hard, fragile, and uncertain. The people who lived there were not yet Romans. They were scattered tribes, herders, and farmers, trying to survive between the larger powers that surrounded them. But stories are stronger than stones, and Rome's story begins with a legend so powerful that it shaped the soul of the city forever. According to that legend, 2 abandoned infants, Romulus and Remus, were left to die by the river. But instead of death, they found a savior in the unlikeliest form, a she-wolf. The image is unforgettable, a fierce animal nursing the fragile boys, her breath steaming in the cold, her yellow eyes glowing in the shadows. It was a story told and retold, whispered at firesides, painted on walls, carved into bronze. For the Romans, it was proof that their destiny was never ordinary. They were born from struggle, born from beasts, and born to rule. Romulus and Remus would grow into strong leaders, gathering followers, shepherds, and outcasts alike. But destiny is rarely gentle. The legend tells us that ambition drove a wedge between the brothers, and in a violent twist, Romulus killed Remus. From blood and betrayal, Rome was named after Romulus. It is a harsh beginning, but a fitting one, because Rome would always carry this dual spirit: loyalty and betrayal, unity and violence, greatness and cruelty, all bound together in its story. The world that Romulus and his followers entered was already old with civilizations. To the north, the Etruscans built cities with stone walls and temples. To the south, the Greeks filled Italy's coasts with bustling colonies, their ships bringing wine, pottery, and ideas from across the sea. And in the heart of this land, the small community of Rome was born, not in isolation, but in the crossroads of powerful neighbors. At first, Rome was little more than huts of mud and straw clustered on the Palatine Hill. Smoke curled from rough fires, children played in the dust, and herds were driven to graze in the fields below. But what set Rome apart was not size or wealth or strength. It was something less visible, but more enduring, a spirit of survival. Outsiders were not shunned, but welcomed. Runaways, exiles, wanderers, and fugitives came to Rome, and instead of pushing them away, the city took them in. From the very start, Rome was built on diversity, forged by the strength of many peoples. The young settlement faced countless struggles. Rival tribes threatened them, famine loomed in harsh winters, and disease often swept through the valley. But Rome's kings, semi-legendary figures, at first kept the community alive. Each king added something new, leaving behind traditions that would echo for centuries. One gave Rome its sacred religious rituals, another its laws, another its military discipline, And slowly the muddy village began to take shape as a true city. Imagine the transformation. Wooden huts replaced by simple stone structures. Dirt paths beginning to harden into roads. The smell of fresh bread baking in ovens. The chatter of traders at a marketplace. The sound of bronze tools shaping shields and plows. Life was still fragile, but it was becoming more organized, more purposeful. More Romang Dot, one of Rome's most dramatic early stories was that of the Sabine women. When the men of early Rome realized their survival depended on wives and children, they looked to the neighboring Sabines. But instead of peaceful negotiation, Romulus devised a daring and ruthless plan. During a festival, the Romans seized the Sabine women and carried them away. Outrage followed, and war broke out. But in the end, the women themselves stood between the armies of their fathers and their new husbands, demanding peace. This moment, both brutal and unifying, showed the paradox of Rome, violent, yet capable of forging strength from that violence. The kings who followed continued to shape Rome. Some were warriors, expanding territory. Others were builders, laying down the first great temples and shrines. The last king, Tarquin the Proud, was remembered as a tyrant, arrogant, cruel, and despised. His downfall would lead to one of Rome's greatest revolutions, the birth of the Republic. But in these early years, what mattered most was survival. Rome endured because its people adapted. They borrowed gods from the Greeks, engineering techniques from the Etruscans, and battle tactics from their neighbors. Nothing was beneath them to learn, and nothing was too foreign to be made Romang. The Tiber River was Rome's lifeline. Its waters shimmered under the sun, carrying goods and traders from distant lands. Boats creaked as they docked on its banks, bringing salt, grain, and iron. Rome's position was no accident. It sat at a crossing of the river, a place where land and water met. Control of this crossing gave Rome both wealth and power, turning it into a hub for trade. The smell of spices, the clink of coins, the laughter of markets, it was all part of the city's heartbeat. What makes Rome's beginning so extraordinary is how ordinary it seems. No vast empire, no glittering palaces, no legendary armies, just shepherds, farmers, and refugees clinging to survival. And yet within them was a fire, a hunger for greatness that would never die. They believed in their destiny, in the myth of their Volf mother, in the strength of their unity. And because they believed it, they built it. If you walked the hills of early Rome, you might not notice anything unusual. You would hear the bleating of goats, smell the smoke of hearth fires, and see men repairing fences or sharpening spears. But beneath that simple surface, something was growing. A city that would one day stretch its power across continents was already whispering its promise. Rome's greatness was not built overnight, nor was it handed down by the gods. It was carved. Slowly, out of hunger, ambition, and survival, the final days of Rome's monarchy would be filled with scandal and blood. The cruelty of its last king, the fire of rebellion, and the birth of a republic were just around the corner. But that is the next step in the story. For now, remember this. From shepherds and fugitives, from wolves and myths, from mud huts and hard soil, a kingdom was born. A kingdom that would rise, fall, and yet live forever in memory. And so, the tale moves forward from kings to citizens, from monarchy to the birth of the Republic. The kingdom was dead. Its last king, Tarquin the Proud, had ruled with cruelty, and his downfall was as violent as his reign. Rome had seen enough of kings, enough of crowns, enough of one man holding all the power. Out of that anger, out of that rebellion, something new was born, something that would shape the destiny of the city for centuries. The Romans called it res publica, the public thing, the republic. And with this invention, Rome stepped onto the stage of history in a way no one could ignore. But the birth of the republic was not a calm beginning. It was a storm. Picture the streets of Rome in those days, the smell of torches in the night air, the echo of voices shouting against tyranny, the clash of swords as people rose up to drive the Tarquins into exile. The city buzzed with both fear and hope. No one knew if this new experiment would survive. For the first time, power was not in the hands of a king, but in the hands of the people, or at least some of the people. Rome was still small, still fragile, but it had created something radical. Instead of a throne, it had magistrates. Instead of royal decrees, it had laws debated in public. Every year, citizens elected 2 men called consuls, who would share power and keep each other in check. No one could be king again. This system was built to prevent tyranny, to stop one man from ever ruling Rome alone. The Republic's leaders also created the Senate and Assembly of Elders, wise men who guided the state with advice, experience, and authority. The Senate was not truly democratic. It favored the wealthy and powerful, but it gave Rome something new: stability. Voices argued, laws were shaped, and for the first time, the people of Rome felt that they had a stake in their future. But Rome was not a city of equals. Deep beneath the surface, a struggle was already brewing. The citizens were divided into 2 groups: the patricians, wealthy families who claimed noble birth, and the plebeians, the common people, the farmers, laborers, and soldiers who carried the weight of the city on their backs. At first, the patricians controlled almost everything: the Senate, the laws, and the courts. The plebeians had little say. Resentment smoldered. Rome's story would be shaped not only by war and conquest, but by the long, slow fight between these 2 classes. Still, in those early years, Rome's survival mattered more than its divisions. The city was surrounded by enemies: Latin tribes, Sabines, Etruscans, all waiting for Rome to stumble, and stumble it did. Armies clashed in the fields, dust and blood rising in the summer heat. But Rome had something unusual, something that set it apart from its neighbors: discipline. The Roman army was not just a mob of warriors. It was organized, trained, and loyal to the state itself. Each soldier carried his shield, his spear, and the weight of duty. Victory or death, Rome demanded both courage and obedience. As the Republic fought, it grew stronger. Victories brought new land, new resources, and new people. Defeats taught lessons that hardened Rome for the battles yet to come. And slowly, the city's reputation began to spread. Rome was no longer just a small settlement by the Tiber. It was becoming a force, one battle at a time. Life in the Republic was rough but alive with energy. Imagine the Romang Forum in those days, the heart of the city. Merchants shouted the prices of grain and olive oil. Priests carried out sacred rituals, the smoke of sacrifices drifting into the sky. Citizens gathered to hear speeches, to argue about laws, to watch trials unfold. The Forum was not just a marketplace. It was the beating heart of the Republic, where politics and daily life blended together. And then came one of Rome's greatest achievements, the 12 Tables. For the first time, the laws were written down for everyone to see. No longer could the patricians twist rules in secret courts. The laws were displayed publicly, carved into bronze, so even the humblest citizen could know his rights. The sound of chisels striking metal echoed through the Forum, marking a turning point in history. This was more than law, it was equality before the law, at least in principle, and it gave the plebeians a weapon in their struggle for fairness. But Rome was never at peace for long. The Republic faced threat after threat, and each one tested its spirit. One of the darkest moments came when the Etruscan king Lars Porsena marched on Rome, determined to restore the monarchy. The city shook with fear, but out of this terror came heroes figures who became legend. Horatius the soldier who stood alone on a bridge, holding back the enemy so his comrades could destroy it. Mucius Scaevola, who thrust his hand into fire to prove Roman courage. These stories, half history and half myth, gave the Republic its identity. They told every citizen, Rome does not bow. Rome endures. As the Republic grew, so did the tension between patricians and plebeians. Plebeian soldiers risked their lives in battle, yet had little power in the city. So they marched out, literally leaving Rome in protest, refusing to fight until their voices were heard. It was called the secession of the plebs, and it terrified the patricians. Without the common people, Rome would crumble. Out of this standoff came new rights. The plebeians won the right to elect their own officials, called tribunes, who could veto unjust laws. For the first time, the common man had a shield against the power of the elite. Step by step, the Republic was evolving. It was not a straight path. There were riots, betrayals, and fierce debates. But with each struggle, Rome became stronger, more flexible, more enduring. This balance between conflict and compromise, between patrician and plebeian, gave Rome its unique strength. Other cities might collapse under division. Rome found ways to bend without breaking. The sound of hammers rang out as aqueducts and roads began to take shape. Fresh water flowed into the city, and roads stretched outward like veins, binding the land together. Farmers brought their goods to market more easily, soldiers marched to battle more quickly, and trade flowed in from faraway lands. The Republic was still young, but its foundations were being laid stone by stone, law by law. If you stood on a hill outside Rome in those days, you would see a city that looked modest, almost humble. But listen closer, and you would hear the heartbeat of something extraordinary. The chanting of priests at the temples, the arguments of senators in the Forum, the tramp of soldiers drilling in formation. It was the sound of a republic finding its voice, and that voice would soon echo far beyond the Tiber. Rome's neighbors were watching. Some feared it, some hated it, but none could ignore it. The Republic was awake, and it was hungry. The next chapters of Rome's story would not be written with laws or debates, but with swords and shields. The Republic was about to expand its reach, testing itself against enemies stronger and more dangerous than it had ever faced before. And in that struggle, Rome would discover its true power, from shepherds to kings, and now from kings to citizens. Rome had survived. But survival was only the beginning. The age of conquest was about to begin. The Republic was young, but it was restless. Rome was no longer content to survive. It hungered to expand, to test its strength against a world beyond its walls. The age of kings was behind it. Now the true power of Rome would rise not through crowns or palaces, but through the iron discipline of its soldiers. The legion had awakened, and once it began to march, nothing would ever be the same. Picture it. The early morning mist lying heavy on the fields outside Rome, the faint sound of horns, long and low, echoing across the hills. Soldiers gather in formation, their shields polished, their sandals laced tight. Leather armor creaks as men tighten straps. The metallic clink of spears and swords fills the air. These were not ragged bands of warriors, but an organized force, a machine of flesh and steel. Each man knew his place. Each man moved as one. When the legion marched, it was like the heartbeat of Rome itself pulsing across the land. In the beginning, Rome's enemies were close. Latin tribes, mountain clans, and neighboring cities all challenged the Republic. Some were stronger, some more numerous, but Rome had something unique: discipline. Roman soldiers fought in ranks, shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears thrust forward in deadly rhythm. It was a wall of men, a living fortress that advanced step by step, never breaking, never faltering. Against this, chaotic charges and scattered skirmishes often collapsed. Victory brought land, defeat brought lessons, and Rome learned quickly. When enemies fought with swift cavalry, Rome trained riders of its own. When they faced warriors with curved swords or longer spears, they adjusted their tactics. The Republic had no shame in borrowing ideas. Every culture it met became a teacher, and every teacher left Rome stronger. But Rome's rise was not built on soldiers alone. It was built on alliances. When Rome defeated a tribe or a city, it did not always destroy them. Instead, it offered something unusual: partnership. Conquered people could become allies, bound by treaties, supplying soldiers for future wars. This system of alliances spread Rome's influence far beyond its walls. Soon, entire regions marched at Rome's side, fighting battles that would shape history. Life in a Roman legion was hard, brutal, and unforgiving. Soldiers trained endlessly, drilling until movements became instinct. They marched long miles carrying heavy packs of food, weapons, and gear. They built camps at night, digging ditches and raising wooden palisades, always prepared for attack. The smell of sweat, the blisters on feet, the hunger in their bellies, this was the daily life of Rome's soldiers, and yet they endured. For in return they were given honor, spoils, and the pride of serving Rome. One of the most dangerous threats came from the Samnites, fierce mountain warriors from central Italy. The wars against them were long and bloody, fought in rugged terrain, where ambushes and surprises were constant. In one infamous battle, the Romans were trapped in a narrow valley, forced to surrender in humiliation. But Rome did not forget. It rebuilt, rearmed, and returned with greater force. Years later, the Samnites were crushed, and their defeat became another stepping stone in Rome's climb to dominance. The wars with the Samnites taught Rome a powerful lesson. It needed flexibility. The old phalanx formations, copied from the Greeks, were too rigid for Italy's hills and forests. So the Romans created something new, the maniple system. Instead of one massive block of soldiers, the legion was divided into small units, able to move, adapt, and fight in rough terrain. This innovation made the Roman legion one of the most effective fighting forces in history. Imagine the battlefield. Trumpets blaring, dust rising from thousands of feet, pounding the earth. Lines of soldiers moving in coordinated blocks, advancing, retreating, flanking with deadly precision. Each maniple was like a piece of a puzzle, shifting and slotting into place until the enemy was overwhelmed. It was not just war, it was choreography, a deadly dance that only Rome could master. As Rome conquered, it also built. Roads stretched across the land, straight and strong, connecting city to city, camp to camp. All roads lead to Rome, people would one day say, and it began here, with the steady march of soldiers laying down stone paths for their legions. Along these roads came trade, culture, and ideas, binding Italy together under Roman rule. But conquest had a cost. Every victory brought new enemies, new rivalries, and greater risks. One of the greatest tests came from the Greek city of Tarentum, which called on a powerful ally to defend it, King Pyrrhus of Epirus. Pyrrhus was no ordinary foe. He was a brilliant general, trained in the style of Alexander the Great, leading an army that included war elephants, beasts the Romans had never seen before. The clash was brutal. Roman soldiers, brave and disciplined, stood their ground against the thunder of elephants and the precision of Greek phalanxes. Pyrrhus won his battles, but at a terrible cost. His losses were so heavy that he famously declared, "Another victory like this, and I am undone." The Romans had given the world the term Pyrrhic victory, a win so costly it feels like defeat. And though Pyrrhus returned home, Rome remained standing, bloodied but unbroken. With Pyrrhus gone, Rome's dominance of Italy was secure. City after city fell under its influence. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome controlled nearly the entire Italian peninsula. What had begun as a small settlement of shepherds had become the master of Italy. And it was all because of the legion, those iron-willed soldiers who marched, fought, and bled for the Republic. The legion was more than an army. It was a symbol. A Roman boy could grow into a man by serving in its ranks. A Roman family could gain honor and wealth through its victories. And every Roman citizen knew that the strength of their city was bound to the strength of their legions. When the soldiers marched, the people of Rome marched with them, in spirit if not in body. But Rome's hunger was not satisfied. Italy was only the beginning. Across the sea lay Carthage, a wealthy and powerful city in North Africa. Its ships ruled the Mediterranean, its merchants controlled trade routes, and its armies were rich with gold. The clash between Rome and Carthage was inevitable, and when it came, it would be a war unlike anything the Republic had ever faced before. The sound of marching feet faded into the distance. The dust of Italy settled. The Republic had risen, had fought, had conquered. But now its gaze turned outward, across the blue waters of the Mediterranean. The legions were ready. The next march would not be across hills or valleys. It would be across history itself. The Republic had conquered Italy. It had defeated Carthage in the Punic Wars, crushed enemies in Greece, and stretched its reach across the Mediterranean. From Spain to Asia Minor, from Africa to Gaul, Rome was now a superpower. Its legions stood unbeaten, its wealth poured in from trade and plunder, its roads and aqueducts tied a vast world together. But inside the Republic, something darker was growing. Power, greed, and ambition were tearing Rome apart from within. And at the center of that storm stood one man, a man whose name would echo through history: Gaius Julius Caesar. The late Republic was a place of glory and chaos. The Senate was filled with old patricians clinging to tradition, jealous of their authority. Ambitious generals commanded armies more loyal to them than to the state. The common people, the plebeians, demanded bread, land, and dignity. Street gangs clashed in riots, the smell of smoke and blood often rising over the forum. Rome was victorious abroad, but crumbling at home. It was in this fractured world that Caesar rose. Born into an old but modest patrician family, Caesar was not the wealthiest man in Rome, but he was ambitious, ferociously ambitious. He had charm, wit, and the ability to sway crowds with his words. His speeches stirred emotions, his generosity won allies, and his boldness inspired loyalty. But what truly made him dangerous was his genius as a commander. Caesar's great stage was Gaul, the lands of modern France. For nearly a decade he waged war there, leading his legions against fierce tribes, massive coalitions, and warriors, who fought with desperate courage. The battles were brutal, forests thick with arrows, rivers stained with blood, shields splintered under the force of Gallic blades. Yet Caesar always emerged victorious. His campaigns expanded Rome's territory to the Atlantic and brought unimaginable wealth back to the Republic. More than that, they made him a hero in the eyes of his soldiers and the Roman people. But in Rome, his growing power terrified the Senate. Men like Pompey, once his ally, now saw him as a threat. The Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. It was a command meant to humble him, to strip him of power. But Caesar was not a man who bowed to orders. The year was 49 BCE. Caesar stood at the banks of the Rubicon River, the small stream that marked the boundary between his province and Italy itself. Behind him stood his loyal legions, hardened by years of war, ready to follow him anywhere. Ahead lay Rome and the Senate that demanded his obedience. He knew the law. To cross the Rubicon with an army was treason. It meant civil war. That night the air was heavy with tension. Soldiers whispered by campfires, the flames crackling against the cold. Caesar walked along the river, his mind turning. If he obeyed, he would return to Rome powerless, perhaps even destroyed by his enemies. If he defied, he would plunge the Republic into war. The moment was heavy with history. And then, with a single step into the river, Caesar made his choice. The die is cast, he is said to have declared. The sound of boots splashing into the Rubicon echoed like thunder. The legions followed, their standards held high. In that moment, the Republic changed forever. The news raced ahead of him. Panic spread through Rome as people realized what had happened. Caesar was marching on the city. Senators fled, scrambling to escape his advance. Pompey and his allies abandoned Rome, retreating to raise their own armies. The city, once the heart of the Republic, became a ghost town as fear gripped its streets. Civil war erupted. Legion fought against legion, Roman against Roman, as the Republic tore itself apart. Battles raged across Italy, Greece, and beyond. At Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar faced Pompey in a clash that shook the ancient world. The dust of thousands of feet filled the sky. The clash of swords and shields thundered like storms. Against greater numbers, Caesar's discipline and strategy won the day. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he met his end not on the battlefield, but at the hands of assassins. With Pompey gone, Caesar returned to Rome as master of the Republic. Yet instead of restoring the Senate's power, he took more for himself. He declared himself dictator not for a short emergency term, as tradition allowed, but for life. He passed reforms, granted citizenship to outsiders, and reshaped Rome's laws. For the common people, he was a champion. For the Senate's elite, he was a tyrant. But Caesar was more than a politician. He was a visionary. He saw Rome not as a city of squabbling senators, but as the heart of a vast empire. He dreamed of roads stretching across continents, of libraries filled with knowledge, of laws uniting peoples under Roman rule. In his mind, the Republic was already dead. Only an empire could hold what Rome had conquered. Yet ambition breeds enemies. Senators whispered in secret, their anger sharp as daggers. They feared Caesar's power, feared his crown of laurel leaves, feared that he would make himself king. Rome had sworn never to have another king, and Caesar's rule looked dangerously close. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, Caesar walked into the Senate house. The air was cool, the marble floor gleaming in the light. Senators gathered around him, their faces calm, their hearts burning with betrayal. Suddenly daggers flashed, blades tore into his body. The sound of steel on flesh, the cries of shock, the frenzy of the attack. Caesar fell, stabbed 23 times, his blood staining the stones of Rome. The man who had crossed the Rubicon lay dead at the feet of the Senate. The Republic thought it had saved itself. But in truth, the murder of Caesar only plunged Rome deeper into chaos. Civil wars erupted again, this time bloodier than ever. From the ashes of this turmoil would rise Caesar's heir Octavian, later called Augustus, the first true emperor of Rome. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon was more than a march. It was a turning point in history, a moment when ambition overcame law, when one man's choice reshaped the destiny of millions. The Republic had awakened centuries before, but now, with Caesar's step into that shallow river, it began its long transformation into empire. And so our story moves forward. From Caesar's fall, Rome would rise again, not as a republic, but as an empire, led by emperors who would claim the world as their own. The next chapter is the dawn of that new age, an age of peace and power, of marble and monuments. It is the age of Augustus. The Ides of March left Rome dripping in blood. Julius Caesar lay dead, his body pierced by daggers, his dreams of empire unfinished. The Senate thought they had saved the Republic, but in truth they had unleashed chaos. Rome became a city of whispers and fear. Streets filled with mobs, banners of rival factions clashed, and the shadow of civil war stretched long over the Republic. Out of this storm would rise a man the world would never forget, Caesar's adopted son and heir, a young man named Octavian. History would know him by another name, Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. At first, few believed Octavian could hold power. He was only 19, thin, pale, and sickly. Against him stood seasoned generals, brilliant orators, and ambitious senators. But Octavian had something more dangerous than muscles or wealth. He had patience, calculation, and the name of Caesar. With cold determination, he positioned himself as the avenger of his murdered father. The people who adored Caesar rallied. To his side, soldiers, still loyal to Caesar's memory, marched under his command. Step by step, Octavian turned doubt into dominance. The years that followed were brutal. Civil wars tore Rome apart once again. Octavian allied with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's fiercest generals, and Marcus Lepidus, a powerful politician. Together, they formed the Second Triumvirate, hunting down Caesar's killers. In the streets of Rome, proscriptions, the lists of enemies, were posted. Names scratched into wax tablets sealed fates. The sound of sandals echoing at night meant death. Squads were near. Wealthy nobles and fiery speakers fell by the dozens. Blood washed through the forum when Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of Caesar's assassination, gathered their forces in the east. Octavian and Antony marched to meet them. The clash came at Philippi in 42 BCE dust, and chaos filled the battlefield. As Romain fought Romain, brother against brother, citizen against citizen. In the end, the assassins were crushed, their dreams of restoring the Republic buried with them. But peace did not return, that the alliance of Octavian and Antony could not last. Antony turned his gaze east, falling under the spell of Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt. Together they dreamed of ruling the world from Alexandria, blending Roman power with Egyptian wealth. To Octavian, this was betrayal. Rome ruled from Rome, not from foreign shores. His propaganda machine roared to life. He painted Antony as a traitor, bewitched by a foreign queen, ready to abandon Roman values. Rome's people turned against Antony, and the stage was set for the final war. The climax came at Actium in 31 BCE, a naval battle that would decide the fate of Rome. Picture the Adriatic Sea shimmering under the sun. Hundreds of ships clashed, their sails snapping in the wind, their decks slick with blood and seawater. Flaming arrows streaked across the sky. The air filled with the stench of burning wood and salt. Cleopatra's fleet broke, Antony's forces collapsed, and Octavian stood triumphant. Antony and Cleopatra would die in Egypt, their love story ending in tragedy, while Octavian returned to Rome as the unchallenged master of the world. But Octavian was not reckless. He knew the people feared kings. He knew the Senate clung to its dignity, so he cloaked his power in careful words. He called himself Princeps' first citizen rather than king. He restored the appearance of the Senate even as he controlled it. He spoke of restoring the Republic, even as he quietly dismantled it. Behind the mask of tradition, Octavian built something new, the Roman Empire. In 27 BCE, the Senate granted him a new title, Augustus, the revered one. It was more than a name, it was a symbol. With Augustus, Rome entered a golden age, an age of peace, prosperity, and glory that would echo for centuries. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, began. After generations of bloodshed, Rome was finally calm. Roads stretched across the empire like veins, carrying merchants, soldiers, and messengers. Ships crowded harbors, bringing grain from Egypt, silk from China, spices from India. Markets overflowed with goods and scents from every corner of the known world. The clink of coins, stamped with Augustus's image, rang through every province. Trade flourished, and Rome became the beating heart of a vast, interconnected world. Augustus reshaped the city itself. Rome, once filled with mud brick huts and crumbling streets, began to shine. Marble temples rose, their columns gleaming in the sun. The Forum became a forest of monuments and arches, each one celebrating victory and power. Statues of Augustus stood tall, not only as reminders of his rule, but as symbols of Rome's strength. He famously declared, "I found Rome a city of bricks, I leave it a city of marble." And he did. Religion, too, was reborn. Augustus restored old temples, revived forgotten rituals, and presented himself as chosen by the gods. Festivals filled the streets with music, incense, and laughter. Sacrifices burned on altars, the smell of roasted meat rising into the air. To the people, Augustus was more than a ruler, he was the guardian of Rome's destiny, the man who had ended chaos and brought order to the world. But peace was not built on kindness alone. Augustus ruled with quiet ruthlessness. Enemies who threatened him disappeared. Armies were loyal to him, not to the Senate. The people loved him, but they also feared him. His system was fragile, built on the strength of one man's vision. Yet while he lived, it worked. For families, life under Augustus felt more secure than ever. Farmers tended their fields without fear of raids. Merchants traveled roads guarded by Roman soldiers. Children grew up hearing stories not of civil war, but of prosperity. Bread and entertainment flowed freely. The people were fed, distracted, and content. Gladiator games, chariot races, and theaters entertained the masses, while behind the scenes, Augustus kept the machinery of empire running. And yet, beneath the peace, the seeds of the future were already planted. The Senate was a shadow of its former self. Real power lay in one man's hands, and when that man died, who would take his place? The Republic was gone, and monarchy, though unspoken, had returned. When Augustus finally died in 14 CE, the city mourned. His funeral was grand, his body carried through Rome with solemn ceremony. Citizens wept, soldiers saluted, senators praised him as a god. Temples were built in his honor, his name carved into stone. Augustus was gone, but the empire he created remained. Rome was no longer a city fighting for survival. It was the center of the world. The age of Augustus was more than the rise of one man. It was the birth of empire. It transformed Rome from a republic torn by civil war into a global power of unmatched wealth and stability. And it set the stage for centuries of rulers who would call themselves emperors. Some would build, some would destroy, but all would walk in the shadow of Augustus' dot, and so our story moves forward. From Augustus's marble city, we step into the heart of the empire at its peak, its culture, its art, its religion, and its daily life. The eternal city, shining in marble, standing as the wonder of the ancient world. The wars were over. The civil strife that had torn Rome apart for generations had faded into memory. The Republic was gone, and in its place stood something greater, something new, the Roman Empire. At its heart was the eternal city itself, no longer a rough settlement of brick and mud, but a capital of dazzling marble and stone. Rome had become more than a city. It was a symbol, a beacon, the shining crown of the ancient world. Close your eyes, and imagine walking through Rome at its peak. The sun rises over the Palatine Hill, casting golden light across a skyline bristling with temples, arches, and towering columns. The smell of incense drifts from shrines, mingling with the scent of bread baking in clay ovens. The streets hum, with life merchants calling out their wares, children laughing, senators in flowing togas discussing politics, soldiers marching in perfect formation. Rome is alive, louder, brighter, and grander than any city on earth. At the center of it all lies the Forum, the heart of Roman life. Marble paving stones gleam beneath sandaled feet. Statues of emperors and gods line the square, their stone faces watching the crowd. Orators stand on raised platforms, their voices carrying across the plaza, as they argue law, policy, or the fate of provinces far beyond Italy. The air buzzes with debate, trade, and worship all at once. For the people of Rome, the Forum is not just a marketplace, it is the stage upon which the drama of empire plays out every day, and towering above it all is the Colosseum, Rome's greatest arena. Its massive stone arches rise high into the sky, a monument to both engineering genius and human spectacle. Step inside, and the roar of 50,000 voices thunders in your ears. The smell of sweat, blood, and dust fills the air. Gladiators plash in the sand, swords ringing against shields, while exotic animals, lions, tigers, even elephants charge into the arena to the delight of the crowd. For the citizens of Rome, these games are more than entertainment. They are proof of empire, a reminder that Rome rules not just men, but the beasts of the earth. Yet Rome's greatness is not measured only in spectacle. It is also written in stone, in aqueducts that carry water from distant mountains into the city. Imagine the sound of water rushing through stone channels, spilling into fountains that sparkle in the sun. Public baths steam with hot water, where citizens gather not only to bathe, but to gossip, do business, and relax. Roads stretch outward from the city like veins, their stones worn smooth by the endless march of legions, merchants, and travelers. All roads lead to Rome, people will say, and in this age it is true. Religion thrives in every corner of the city. Temples rise to Jupiter, Venus, and Mars, their marble steps crowded with worshippers offering sacrifices. Incense burns, priests chant, and sacred fires blaze, never allowed to die. The Vestal Virgins, guardians of Rome's holy flame, walk in solemn silence through the Forum, their white robes fluttering in the breeze. For Romans, the gods are everywhere watching, guiding, demanding respect. To honor them is to honor Rome itself. Art and culture flourish. Walls are painted with bright fresco scenes of gods, heroes, and everyday life. Mosaics glimmer in the homes of the wealthy, tiny tiles pieced together into intricate patterns and lifelike portraits. Sculptors carve marble into lifelike figures, their details so perfect that veins seem to pulse beneath the stone. Poets like Virgil and Ovid craft verses that echo through eternity, telling stories of heroes, love, and the destiny of Rome. The city is not only a place of power, it is a place of beauty, imagination, and expression. But beneath the marble and the glory, daily life is not easy for all. The poor crowd into cramped apartments, the smell of smoke and sewage heavy in the air. Fires break out often, spreading quickly through wooden homes. disease lurks in dirty streets. Yet even here, Rome provides grain from the provinces, feeds the hungry. Public fountains give clean water, and the games offer distraction. For the common citizen, life is hard, but it is still Roman life. To belong to Rome is to belong to the greatest city the world has ever known. The empire itself feeds the eternal city. Ships from every corner of the Mediterranean dock at Rome's bustling ports. Grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, spices from the East, all pour into this city, filling markets with riches. Traders shout in dozens of languages. Their goods stacked high, the clink of coins echoing as buyers haggle. Rome is not only the center of Italy, it is the center of the world, its lifeblood flowing from lands thousands of miles away. The emperors build ceaselessly, each one determined to leave his mark. Augustus gave Rome marble. His successors add more arches celebrating victory, temples honoring gods, theaters echoing with song and drama. Domes rise into the sky, their grandeur unmatched. The Pantheon, with its massive rotunda and oculus open to the heavens, inspires awe with every step inside. When rain falls through its open ceiling, droplets shimmer on the polished stone floor, as if the gods themselves are blessing the temple. And yet, for all its splendor, Rome remains a city of contrasts. Wealth and poverty, beauty and brutality, order and chaos live side by side. Senators debate philosophy while slaves labor in silence. Citizens cheer at the Colosseum while blood soaks into the sand. Rome's greatness is real, but so too is its cruelty. The eternal city is built on triumph and tragedy, alike dot still. There is a sense that Rome will last forever. To the citizens who walk its streets, it seems unshakable, eternal, destined to endure for all time. The marble gleams, too. Brightly, the armies march too powerfully. The empire stretches too far for collapse to seem possible. They believe that as long as Rome stands, the world itself will stand with it. But history whispers another truth. Empires rise and empires fall. And even as Rome shines at its peak, shadows are forming at its edges. Wars in distant provinces, whispers of rebellion, new religions stirring in secret, all will one day test the strength of this marble city dot for now, though the eternal city of marble stands unchallenged. Its arches, roads, and temples gleam in the sunlight. Its people revel in games, festivals, and trade. Rome is not just a city. It is an idea, carved into stone, etched into memory, built to last dat, and as the city thrives, another force is growing. Within it, not in marble or stone, but in faith. A force that will rise quietly at first, then roar so loudly it will change Rome forever. The story of gods, faith, and the cross awaits. The marble temples gleamed. Statues of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus watched over the eternal city. Incense burned on altars. Priests lifted their hands in prayer, and the people of Rome believed their gods guarded the empire. For centuries these gods had marched with Rome's legions, blessed its victories, and shaped its destiny. But deep within the city, in shadowed rooms and whispered gatherings, a new faith was stirring, one that would not honor Jupiter or Mars, one that would not bow to emperors as gods, a faith that would rise from the cross. Rome was a city of religion, a city where gods lived in every corner. Every street had its shrine, every family its household spirits. Before a journey, a Roman offered wine. After a harvest, he gave thanks. With bread, the gods were everywhere, demanding respect, promising protection, and reminding every citizen that Rome's greatness was tied to their favor. To anger the gods was to endanger the city. To honor them was to keep Rome eternal. The temples were marvels. Walk into the temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, and you would smell the heavy scent of sacrifices, hear the chants of priests echoing against marble walls, see golden statues gleaming in the torchlight. Festivals filled the calendar. Crowds lined the streets for processions, watching sacred fires carried through the forum. Children laughed, musicians played, and petals rained down as the people celebrated their gods. To be Roman was to worship Dot, but religion in Rome was not only about faith, it was about power. Emperors claimed divine favor, building temples to themselves, their images carved into marble alongside the gods. Augustus declared himself the son of a god. Later emperors demanded worship outright. To question this was not just impiety, it was treason. To refuse was dangerous. And yet in quiet corners a new faith took root. It did not begin in marble temples, but in humble gatherings. It did not speak of Jupiter's thunder or Mars's sword, but of a carpenter from Judea, a man crucified under Roman law. His followers whispered of his teachings: love your neighbor, bless the meek, forgive your enemies. They told stories of miracles, of compassion, of a kingdom not of this world. And they spoke of the cross, not as a symbol of shame, but as a symbol of hope. At first, the movement was small, hidden. Followers met in secret, in catacombs beneath the city, where the air was damp and heavy, and oil lamps flickered against stone walls. There, among the graves of the dead, they sang hymns and shared bread and wine, remembering their crucified. Teacher, to Rome it seemed insignificant, a strange sect, one of many, but this faith was different. It offered something Rome's old gods could not: equality. The poor, the enslaved, the outcast all found a place at its table. In a world of sharp hierarchies, this was radical. To a slave told he was nothing, the message that he was loved by God was revolutionary. To a poor widow, the promise of eternal life was priceless. Word spread, carried by merchants, soldiers, and travelers. Rome's leaders saw danger in this. To refuse sacrifices to the gods was to insult Rome. To deny the emperor's divinity was rebellion. Persecution followed. Christians were arrested, beaten, thrown to the beasts in the Colosseum. The roar of lions, the screams of victims, the cheers of the crowd filled the air as martyrs died for their faith. Yet the strange thing was this: the blood of martyrs did not silence the movement, it made it stronger. The courage of those who died inspired others. The cross spread. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Christianity grew from a small sect to a vast underground network. Even as emperors tried to crush it, the faith endured. Families taught their children in secret, bishops guided communities, and letters passed between believers across provinces. Rome could not stamp it out. The cross was too resilient. Then came a turning point. In the early 4th century, a man named Constantine rose to power. Before a great battle, he looked at the sky and, according to legend, saw a vision, a cross of light with the words, "In this sign you will conquer." Constantine fought under that symbol, won, and became emperor. And with him, Christianity stepped. Out of the shadows that no longer hunted, Christians now built their own temples, vast basilicas rising beside Rome's marble shrines. Bishops walked openly, councils gathered to define beliefs, and the faith spread faster than ever before. Within a century, Rome's old gods were fading. The temples stood silent, their fires cold, while the cross crowned the empire. The transformation was staggering. For centuries, Rome had prayed to Jupiter for victory, to Mars for strength, to Venus for love. Now the empire bowed to one God, unseen yet all-powerful. The cross that once marked Rome's victims now marked its rulers. The emperor himself became a protector of the faith. What began in whispers had become Rome's soul, and yet not all was peace. The rise of Christianity brought conflict. Pagans resisted, clinging to their ancient traditions. Emperors debated doctrine, and heresy split believers. The empire itself became a battlefield of ideas. But the shift was irreversible. Rome was no longer a city of many gods. It was the city of one God. Walk through Rome in this new age, and you would still see marble temples, but many stood empty. Instead, the sound of hymns echoed through basilicas. Priests lifted chalices of wine, incense rose, and the faithful gathered. In prayer, the eternal city had changed its faith, and in doing so changed the world. Rome's gods had once promised power, victory, and glory. The cross promised something different: hope, redemption, and eternal life. In this promise, millions found strength. The faith that began with a crucifixion would outlive the empire itself, carried forward by those who believed. And so the story of Rome moves on. From marble temples to secret catacombs, from persecution to triumph, from Jupiter to Christ, the city had transformed. But while faith reshaped the soul of Rome, its people still hungered for bread and spectacle. And in the arenas and circuses of the empire, the roar of the crowd would continue to echo. Rome may have conquered the world with its legions, but it ruled its people with something far simpler: bread and games. Feed the stomach, thrill the senses, and the city would remain calm. Behind the marble temples and military triumphs, it was this balance, this rhythm of survival and spectacle that kept the eternal city alive. Close your eyes and step into the streets of Rome. The air is thick with smells: bread fresh from the ovens, olives brined in clay jars, the tang of fish carried up from the Tiber's docks. Merchants shout their prices in a dozen accents. Carts creak on cobbled roads, and the hum of thousands of voices rises like a constant song. This is the lifeblood of the empire. Not just war, but the daily struggle to feed and entertain millions. The empire's reach made Rome the richest market in the world. Ships from Egypt unloaded mountains of grain, the gold and wheat that fed the city's masses. Without it, Rome would starve. Amphorae of olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, spices from the East, silk from China, all spilled into Roman markets. Coins stamped with the emperor's face clanked from hand to hand, the sound of power made small enough to fit in a pocket. For the poor, life was hard. Crowded into tall, smoky apartments called insulae, families scraped by, their lives a blur of labor and survival. But the empire provided just enough cheap bread from state granaries, free grain for the very poor too. Keep rebellion at bay. And when food was not enough, there were the games. Rome gave its people entertainment on a scale no city had ever seen. The Colosseum, vast and uncheckable, could hold more than 50,000 souls. On festival days, crowds surged through its arches, their sandals slapping stone, their voices echoing in excitement. The air inside was electric laughter, shouts, the low rumble of anticipation. Then the games began. Gladiators stepped onto the sand, their muscles gleaming with oil, their helmets catching the sun. The crowd roared, stamping feet like thunder. Swords clashed, shields splintered, blood darkened the ground. Some gladiators were slaves, condemned to fight. Others were volunteers, chasing glory and fame. A few became legends, their names whispered like heroes. For the crowd it was not cruelty, it was spectacle, a mirror of Rome's own power. If the empire conquered the world, why should not its arenas conquer men and beasts alike? The spectacles were not limited to gladiators. Exotic animals from across the empire were shipped to Rome, lions from Africa, tigers from the east, crocodiles from the Nile. Crowds gasped as hunters faced them, spears flashing in the sunlight. Sometimes entire mock battles filled the arena, with ships floating on water poured into the Colosseum, recreating great naval victories. Rome did not just entertain, it recreated empire itself, showing the people their power reflected in blood and pageantry. But games were not only about violence. Chariot races at the Circus Maximus were just as beloved. Imagine the thunder of hooves, the dust rising in clouds, the creak of wheels as chariots tore around the track. Tens of thousands screamed for their team, the reds, the blues, the greens, or the whites. Factions battled for dominance not just on the track, but in the streets. The excitement was wild, intoxicating. Children grew up swearing loyalty to colors as fiercely as to gods. For many Romans, the races were not just sport, they were life itself. Festivals filled the year with celebration. Saturnalia, the festival of Saturn, turned the city upside down. Masters served slaves, gifts were exchanged, and the streets filled with revelry. Torches lit the night, music spilled from taverns, and laughter echoed through alleys. In these moments the weight of empire lifted, and for a few days everyone, rich or poor, slave or citizen, shared in joy. Behind this spectacle, daily life moved on. For the wealthy, luxury was everywhere. Villas glittered with mosaics, banquets overflowed with delicacies, roasted peacocks, honeyed fruits, imported fish. Reclining on couches, aristocrats debated philosophy, poetry, or politics, while slaves poured wine into their cups. For the poor, meals were simpler bread, porridge, beans. Yet in the taverns, laughter still flowed with cheap wine, and gossip filled the smoky air. Roman streets were never silent. Bakers rose before dawn, filling the air with the scent of rising loaves. Metal workers rang hammers on anvils, sparks lighting dark workshops. Water splashed in fountains where women filled jugs and children played. Musicians wandered, their flutes and drums weaving through the noise of markets. Rome never truly slept. It was too alive, too vast, too crowded. But the empire system of bread and games was not merely kindness, it was control. Emperors understood that if the people were fed and entertained, they would not rise in rebellion. Bread kept their bellies full, games filled their hearts with awe, and in that balance Rome maintained order. The people looked to their emperor not only as a ruler, but as the giver of sustenance and spectacle. Loyalty was bought with grain. And blood. Even in this daily rhythm, there were cracks. Grain shipments sometimes failed, storms wrecking ships, pirates seizing cargo. Hunger could spread quickly, and when it did, the streets turned dangerous. Riots flared, fires raged, and emperors trembled. The empire's lifeblood, its ability to feed millions, was both its strength and its vulnerability. Still, for centuries, Rome managed to keep the balance, and in that balance its culture thrived. Stories were told in crowded theaters. Poets recited verses to cheering crowds, musicians played, in candlelit gatherings. The city pulsed with creativity, invention, and ambition. Bread and games might have controlled the masses, but they also gave Romans space to dream, to imagine, to live. Stand in the forum on a festival day, and you would feel it, the hum of voices, the smell of roasting meat from vendors' stalls, the thunder of distant races at the Circus Maximus, the laughter of children chasing each other between marble columns. It was chaotic, messy, overwhelming, but it was alive. This was Rome not as an empire of maps and conquests, but as a human world, bursting with hunger, joy, and spectacle. And yet, beneath the noise and laughter, shadows were lengthening. The empire's borders stretched far, its armies thin. Barbarians pressed at the frontiers, testing Rome's strength. Faraway wars drained coffers, and while citizens cheered in the Colosseum, beyond the horizon danger was growing. The bread and the games could distract the people, but they could not stop the storm that was coming. For now, though Rome still dazzled, its streets alive with spectacle, and its citizens bound by bread and entertainment, the eternal city thrived, shining in marble, echoing with laughter and cheers. But beyond the frontiers, across rivers and forests, enemies gathered. Soon the legions would be tested as never before. The story of Rome moves from the roar of the Colosseum to the clash of shields on distant frontiers. The empire's borders are calling. The next chapter belongs to the edges of the world, the frontiers of Rome. Rome called itself eternal. Its people believed the gods had chosen it to rule without end. But even the eternal city had limits, and those limits were tested on the edges of the empire, on the rivers, deserts, and forests where Rome met the unknown. These frontiers were more than borders. They were the clash between civilization and wilderness, between empire and the worlds beyond. Picture a Roman legion marching north, the air thick with the smell of pine forests and damp earth. The soldiers wear heavy cloaks against the cold, their sandals crunching on frozen ground. Their shields glisten with frost, their breath rises like smoke. Ahead of them lies Germania, dark, vast, untamed. To the Romans, it is a land of endless forests and fierce tribes, a place where the sun sets behind a wall of trees and mystery waits beyond every shadow. Here, on the Rhine and Danube, Rome drew its line. Fortresses of stone and timber stood. Watch along the rivers, their fires glowing in the night. Towers rose above the wilderness, and walls stretched across the land, marking where empire ended and the wild began. Beyond, Germanic tribes moved with freedom, their war cries echoing through the woods. Rome called them barbarians, yet it feared them, for they fought not in rigid lines but in chaos, striking fast and vanishing into the forests. To the east, the frontiers looked different. There the empire faced the deserts of Parthia, and later, Persia lands of blazing sun and endless sand. The Roman eagle clashed with Persian cavalry, horsemen swift and deadly, their arrows whistling through the air. The sound of hooves thundered across deserts, dust storms rising like walls. Battles here were not just about land, but about pride, as Rome and Persia wrestled for dominance, each refusing to bow to the other. To the south lay Africa's burning deserts. Rome's presence reached the edges of the Sahara, where soldiers marched under a sun so fierce that armor burned to the touch, and the horizon shimmered with heat. Yet even here, Rome built roads and fortresses, carving order into emptiness. Caravans brought ivory, gold, and exotic animals for Rome's arenas. Lions roared in cages, brought from African hunts to die before cheering crowds in the Colosseum. The frontier was not just defense, it was the empire's lifeline, its arteries carrying wealth to the eternal city. And to the west, Rome met the endless ocean. Beyond Spain, the Atlantic stretched into mystery. Roman sailors ventured cautiously, their wooden ships creaking as waves crashed against them. They spoke of strange lands beyond, but Rome never mastered these seas. The ocean was a frontier too vast, too wild, even for the empire. But perhaps the most famous frontier of all was in the north, Britannia. To the Romans, Britain was a land of fog and rain, where the air smelled of wet soil and peat fires, and painted warriors charged screaming from the mist. Julius Caesar had glimpsed it during his expeditions, but it was Emperor Claudius who brought it fully into the empire. Legions crossed the Channel, elephants among them stunning the tribes of Britain. Towns rose, roads cut through fields, and Rome's mark was carved into the land. Yet Britain never fully bent to empire. Revolts flared, most famously under Queen Boudica, who led her warriors in a fiery rebellion that nearly burned Rome's hold to ashes. The memory of her fury haunted Rome long after the smoke cleared. Farther north still, in Scotland, the Romans met resistance they could not tame. Tribes fought with fierce determination, their cries echoing across the highlands. The Romans built walls, Hadrian's Wall first, then Antonines' farther north lines of stone and fortresses stretching across Britain to hold back the wild. Stand on Hadrian's Wall, and you would feel it, the wind cutting across the moors, the endless wilderness beyond, and the heavy silence of a world Rome could not conquer. These frontiers were not only about battle, they were about contact trade, culture, and exchange. Merchants carried Roman wine and pottery into tribal lands, returning with furs, amber, and silver. Soldiers stationed at far-off forts married local women, blending cultures. Latin words mixed with native tongues, Roman gods with local spirits. Even on the empire's edge, Rome was never just a conqueror. It absorbed, adapted, and transformed, but the frontiers were fragile. They demanded constant defense. Legions were stretched thin, their camps dotting thousands of miles. Imagine the life of a frontier soldier, the smell of damp leather, the endless drilling and cold rain, the distant howl of wolves at night. Weeks, months, years passed far from home. Loyalty tested not by glory, but by boredom and hardship. And when raids came, sudden and violent, the price was often blood. One of the darkest days for Rome came in Germania in the year 09 CE. In the Teutoburg forest, 3 Roman legions marched through thick woods, their armor clattering, their banners swaying. Then from the trees chaos erupted. Germanic warriors rained spears and arrows from all sides. The forest trapped the Romans, their formations broken, their discipline useless in the tangle of branches and mud. But for 3 days the slaughter continued. By the end, tens of thousands of Romans lay dead, their eagles captured, their bodies left to rot beneath the trees. The disaster shook Rome to its core. Never again would it try to fully conquer Germania. The frontier had spoken, yet Rome endured. It rebuilt its strength, fortified its borders, and continued to project its power. Still, the frontiers revealed a truth the Romans seldom admitted. Even the greatest empire has limits. The further Rome stretched, the harder it became to hold. The Eternal City could command legions, build walls, and raise monuments, but beyond the Rhine, beyond the Danube, beyond the deserts and seas, the world remained untamed. And in time, those untamed worlds would press harder and harder against Rome. Tribes would gather, nations would rise, and the walls that had once protected the empire would become lines of desperation. The frontiers were Rome's pride, but they would also be its undoing. For now, though, imagine the empire at its height, the roar of the Colosseum in the heart of Rome, the steady tramp of legions on the Rhine, the cries of merchants at faraway markets in Egypt or Gaul. From desert to forest, from sea to mountain, Rome stretched across 3 continents, its roads, laws, and language binding millions of lives. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen, but even in its glory, cracks were forming. The emperors who followed Augustus would face temptations of power, madness, and corruption. Some would guide Rome with wisdom. Others would drag it toward ruin. The frontier was not the only danger. The greatest threat to Rome might come from within. And so the story turns. From the wild frontiers we return to the heart of Rome, to the palaces and throne rooms where emperors ruled. The next chapter belongs to them emperors of madness and might. An empire is not just built on armies and roads. It is built on the men who rule it. Rome's emperors were meant to be the guardians of peace, the heirs of Augustus's vision. But not all emperors wore the crown of power with wisdom. Some ruled with brilliance, turning Rome into a beacon of prosperity. Others ruled with chaos, plunging the empire into terror. To walk through Rome in the age of emperors was to live under the shadow of one man's will, whether it was noble or insane. The early emperors after Augustus kept his dream alive. Tiberius, his successor, was a soldier at heart stern, distant, often feared. He ruled with caution, building Rome's strength, but earning little love. His reign showed Rome a truth. Emperors did not need to charm the people if they held the legion's loyalty. But soon after, the crown passed to a man whose name would become a byword for madness, Caligula. Caligula began with promise. Young, energetic, adored by the people, he seemed destined to continue Augustus's peace. But power twisted him. Stories say he declared himself a living god, that he built temples to his own divinity, that he named his horse a consul of Rome. The streets whispered of cruelty executions for amusement, wild extravagance paid for by crushing taxes. Whether all the tales are true or not, one thing is certain. Caligula's reign ended in blood, when his own guards turned against him. Then came Claudius, unexpected and underestimated. Limping, stammering, often mocked, he seemed weak, yet behind that awkward shell was a brilliant mind. Claudius strengthened Rome's administration, expanded into Britannia, and proved that not all emperors needed charisma to succeed. Rome learned that power sometimes hid in unlikely places, but after Claudius came Nero, and with him Rome again tasted chaos. Nero saw himself as an artist, a poet, a performer. He sang on stages, raced chariots, and basked in applause while senators cringed. Yet behind the vanity was cruelty. His own mother fell to his assassins, his rivals burned, and the city lived in fear. When a great fire swept through Rome, flames devouring entire districts, whispers blamed Nero himself. Whether guilty or not, the rumor stuck, and with it his reputation crumbled. Eventually, abandoned even by his guards, Nero took his own life, declaring, "What an artist dies in me." With his death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended, and Rome staggered into chaos. Civil war erupted, and in a single year known as the year of the 4 emperors, Rome saw rulers rise and fall in quick succession. It was a year of marching armies, shifting loyalties, and bloody intrigue. But from the chaos emerged Vespasian, a soldier who restored order and built one of Rome's greatest monuments, the Colosseum. With him, the Flavian dynasty brought Rome stability once more. Then came the age of the so-called 5 good emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. For nearly a century, Rome flourished under rulers of wisdom and restraint. Trajan expanded the empire to its greatest size, stretching from the sands of Arabia to the forests of Britain. Hadrian strengthened its defenses, building walls to mark its borders. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote meditations on duty and virtue even as he fought wars against invading tribes. This golden age was proof that empire could be ruled with balance, that might and wisdom could walk hand in hand. But Rome's fortune could not last forever. After Marcus Aurelius, the throne passed to his son, Commodus, and with him madness returned. Commodus fancied himself a gladiator, fighting in the Colosseum while Rome's senators watched in humiliation. He renamed the months after himself, paraded as Hercules reborn, and turned government into farce. His assassination ended his reign, but it also marked a turning point. Rome's emperors were becoming less stable, its politics more fragile. Centuries that followed were a carousel of rulers, some noble, some brutal, many short-lived. Assassinations became common. Emperors were raised by the sword and cut down by it just as quickly. The throne was no longer a seat of destiny, but a dangerous gamble. And yet, through it all, the empire endured. Its armies still marched, its roads still carried trade, its marble still gleamed. Imagine living in Rome under these emperors. One year the city celebrates triumphs, the forum filled with flowers, the emperor cheered like a god. The next year, statues are torn down, coins melted, names erased. Fear and hope rise and fall like the tide, tied to the moods of one man. The empire is mighty, but it is also fragile, for when the ruler stumbles, millions feel the shock. And yet, even in this cycle of brilliance and madness, Rome's spirit remained unbroken. Its people adapted, its senators schemed, its legions stayed loyal to the paymaster of the moment. The empire was larger than any one man, though each emperor left his mark for better or worse on its story. In the palaces of Rome, emperors dreamed of eternity. Some built monuments, some burned cities, some wrote philosophy, some played the lyre. Their reigns remind us that empire is not just stone and steel, but human shaped by ambition, pride, wisdom, and madness. But while emperors fought for power in the capital, the world beyond Rome was shifting. On the frontiers, new threats gathered. Tribes pressed harder against the borders. Armies grew restless. The balance of bread, games, and empire was straining. The madness of emperors could be survived, but what of the storms outside Rome's walls? The next chapter belongs to those storms, the tribes and warriors who would one day stand at Rome's gates, demanding not bread or games, but conquest. The barbarians were coming. For centuries, Rome had called itself eternal. Its armies had marched across the world. Its emperors had ruled with iron and marble. Its people had believed the city could never fall. But on the frontiers, far from the Colosseum and the glittering temples, the ground was shifting. Tribes were gathering. Nations were rising. And soon the eternal city would hear a sound it had never imagined, the sound of barbarians pounding at its gates. It began slowly, almost quietly. Along the Rhine and Danube, the Germanic tribes pressed harder against Rome's borders. Tall warriors with long hair and heavy axes crossed rivers in the night, raiding villages, testing the empire's strength. To Rome, they were barbarian outsiders who spoke strange tongues, lived in forests, and knew nothing of civilization. But the truth was more dangerous. These tribes were strong, mobile, and hungry for land. At first, Rome held firm. Legions guarded the rivers, forts lined the frontiers, and walls rose against the wild. The frontier defenses were alive with soldiers. The smell of campfires drifted through forests. The clang of hammers echoed as men repaired walls, but cracks began to show. The empire was vast, too vast, and its legions were stretched thin. Every border demanded protection, yet not every border could be held. In the east, new enemies struck. The Persians challenged Rome again and again, their horsemen swift, their armies fierce. In the deserts, dust storms rose with the thunder of hooves, arrows whistling against Roman shields. Victories were costly, defeats devastating, and while Rome fought in the east, the west grew restless. Then came a storm greater than any Rome had faced: the Huns. From the steppes of Asia they rode, swift horsemen with faces hardened by wind and sun. They struck like lightning, appearing without a warning, vanishing into the horizon. Entire tribes fled before them, pouring into Roman lands, desperate for safety. The empire, already strained, now faced waves of refugees at its gates: Goths, Vandals, Franks, all driven westward by the fury of the Huns. In 378 CE, disaster struck at Adrianople. The Roman army, led by Emperor Valens, marched to confront the Goths. The day was hot, the sun burning down on armored men. Dust rose from thousands of marching feet, but the Goths fought with desperation, their families behind them, their future at stake. The Roman lines broke. Chaos consumed the battlefield. When it was over, 2/3 of the Roman army lay dead, including the emperor himself. The defeat shattered Rome's illusion of invincibility. The legions could be destroyed. The gates could be forced open, and open they would be In 410 CE, the unthinkable happened. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, marched his warriors to Rome itself. For centuries the city had stood untouched by foreign hands, but now, at last, its gates were broken. Imagine it. The crash of battering rams, the screams of citizens, the smoke rising as Goths poured through the streets. Temples were looted, palaces burned, the forum echoed with cries of terror. For 3 days the eternal city was sacked. The heart of the empire, once thought invulnerable, lay bleeding. The shock was immense. Across the world people gasped. How could Rome fall? How could the city of marble, the city of emperors and gods, be broken by barbarians? St. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, captured the despair. The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. The age of eternity was crumbling dot, yet Rome endured wounded, weakened, but still standing. The empire staggered on, trying to rebuild, trying to resist, but the barbarians kept coming. Vandals crossed into North Africa, seizing the empires. Breadbasket? From Carthage, their ships sailed across the Mediterranean, raiding Rome's coasts. In 455, they came for the city itself. Once again, Rome's streets shook with the tramp of foreign boots. The Vandals stripped the city bare, carrying off treasures, statues, and relics. The sack of 455 carved the word Vandal into memory. Itself a symbol of destruction, other tribes carved their own kingdoms out of Roman land. Franks settled in Gaul, Visigoths in Spain, Vandals in Africa, Ostrogoths in Italy. The empire was no longer a single, unshakable power. It was breaking apart, piece by piece, as barbarians built new worlds on its ruins. And yet, not all barbarians came as destroyers. Many admired Rome, adopted its laws, wore its armor, minted coins with Roman symbols. Some even called themselves Romang, ruling as heirs to its legacy. But the old empire, the empire of Augustus, Trajan, and Marcus Aurelius, was dying. The barbarians were not just raiders. They were the future. The final blow came in 476 CE. Odoacer, a Germanic leader, deposed Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the West. The boy emperor, barely a teenager, surrendered his crown. The empire that had once ruled the known world was no more. The Eastern Empire in Constantinople lived on for 1,000 years, but the Western Roman Empire was gone. The eternal city had fallen. Imagine standing on Rome's hills in those years. The Colosseum still loomed, but its stones cracked. The aqueducts still stretched across valleys, but water no longer flowed through every channel. The temples stood, but many were silent, their gods forgotten. The marble city was fading, piece by piece its glory dimmed. And beyond the walls, the banners of barbarians fluttered in the wind. Rome had been brought low, not just by enemies at its gates, but by weakness within, corruption, division, and the weight of holding too vast a world. The barbarians did not destroy Rome alone. They simply struck the final blows to a giant already falling. And yet Rome's story did not end in fire and ashes. Its spirit survived, carried in the kingdoms that rose from its ruins, in the language of its people, in the faith of its church, in the very idea of empire itself. Rome had fallen, but Rome also lived on. The story now turns to that final chapter. Fall, yes, but also the shadow Rome cast across the centuries that followed. From shepherds to kings, from emperors to barbarians, what remained was something more powerful than armies: legacy. The eternal city had been humbled. The sackings, the invasions, the endless struggles had shaken Rome to its core. By the year 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire was gone. A boy emperor named Romulus Augustulus had surrendered his crown to a barbarian warlord, and with that act, centuries of empire crumbled into memory. The marble arches still stood, the aqueducts still stretched across valleys, but the power that had built them was broken. The question lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. How could something so vast, so mighty, fall? The truth is that Rome did not collapse in a single day, nor in a single sack. It was a slow unraveling, a fabric pulled apart, thread by thread. Corruption seeped into its senate, emperors rose and fell in rapid succession. Armies were loyal to generals instead of the state, and the empire grew too vast for one city to hold. Its wealth bred decadence, its politics bred division, and its strength was stretched across too many frontiers. When the barbarians came, they did not strike down a giant. They toppled a weakened colossus already swaying in the wind. Yet even in ruin, Rome refused to vanish. Walk through the city after its fall, and you would still see the Colosseum, silent but standing. You would still see aqueducts arching across the countryside, bringing water long after emperors were gone. You would still tread roads so straight and strong that centuries of feet and hooves could not erase them. Rome had fallen, but its bones endured, and its shadow stretched far. The barbarians who conquered Rome did not destroy its memory. They inherited it. The Visigoths in Spain, the Franks in Gaul, the Ostrogoths in Italy all adopted parts of Roman law, Roman language, Roman customs. Coins bore Roman symbols. Kings crowned themselves in Roman style. Even in defeat, Rome shaped the world. In the east, the empire lived on. Constantinople, the city of Constantine, became the new Rome. From its golden walls, the Byzantine Empire carried Roman laws, Roman armies, and Roman faith for another 1,000 years. When the West fell silent, the East still sang with Rome's voice. And when Constantinople itself finally fell in 1453, men still called it Rome's end, because even then the empire's name had not died, but Rome's shadow was not only in crowns and empires, it lived in the church. From the quiet gatherings of persecuted Christians in catacombs to the basilicas that rose in the heart of the city, Rome became the cradle of a faith that outlived its empire. The Pope sat where emperors once ruled, bishops debated where senators once argued, and the cross replaced the eagle as the symbol of Rome's destiny. In this way, Rome's soul did not perish. It transformed. Language carried its memory too. Latin, once the tongue of senators and soldiers, became the foundation of new languages: Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. Even English carries Roman words in its veins. Every time we speak them, Rome whispers again. Its laws endured as well. The Roman system of justice contracts, citizenship, rights became the model for nations centuries later. Even today, in courts across the world, echoes of Roman law shape decisions. Rome fell, but its order did not, and its vision of empire lingered. Kings and emperors across Europe dreamed of reviving it. Charlemagne called himself Emperor of the Romans. The Holy Roman Empire took its name from it. Renaissance artists and thinkers looked back to its marble, its philosophy, its grandeur, and built anew. Even in the modern age, governments, cities, and nations look to Rome for inspiration in law, architecture, and power. Perhaps this is the greatest truth of Rome. It never truly died. Its armies disappeared, its emperors crumbled into dust, its palaces fell to ruin. But its idea, its shadow, was too vast to fade. Rome was more than a city. It was a vision of order, of strength, of civilization itself. Imagine standing in Rome today in the ruins of the Forum. The marble columns rise against the sky, broken but proud. The Colosseum looms, weathered yet eternal. Tourists walk where senators once debated, where Caesar once strode, where emperors once ruled. The air smells of stone warmed by the sun, of dust carried on the wind. Listen closely, and you can almost hear it, the echo of footsteps, the murmur of debate, the roar of crowds. Rome is gone, and yet it is still here. From shepherds on a hillside, to kings in a palace, to emperors ruling the world, to barbarians breaking its gates, Rome's journey is a story of rise, glory, and fall. But it is also a story of legacy, of a shadow that stretches across centuries. The eternal city was not eternal in flesh, but eternal in memory. The fall of Rome is not an end. It is a transformation. From its ruins rose new worlds, new languages, new faiths, and new powers. And though its empire has long since crumbled, its shadow still lies over us all. Rome never truly died. Rome lives on in our words, our laws, our buildings, our dreams. The eternal city cast a shadow so vast that even today, 2,000 years later, we still walk within it.